So I was sitting at the lunch table and I wrote out, Kid Phenom. I realized I wouldn't be a kid forever. So I dropped the kid, wrote Phenom. I didn't like how plain it looked.
Yeah.
And I just flipped the P. Like the mirror image of the P was the 9, and my birthday September, so it's the 9th month of the year. I feel like I could justify it that way, and it's been that ever since. I mean, I don't feel like doing what I do, I have to go to school, but like I have the creative aspect of it, and I do professional theater.
Right.
When I'm not acting on stage, I'm a carpenter.
That's
so
cool,
I
dude.
try to just fill out my time, still utilizing my creativity, learning new skills and stuff.
When you said that you're into theater, I would have no idea that that's something that you would have been interested in.
That was my first love, man. I have been acting since I was... So I was a really rambunctious kid. I had a lot of energy as a kid. And my parents didn't know what to do with me. I excelled in school, I was fine, and I would finish my work before everyone else. And I would always try to be the class clown, always center of attention, right? And I had a therapist as a child, and my child therapist recommended why don't you put him in acting classes? So we started classes. I was in kindergarten, so I had to have been 5 or 6, and Miami Children's Museum, because I'm from Miami. And we enrolled in Miami Children's Museum. I would go every Tuesday and Thursday. And so we did those classes, and at the end of it was like a 10-week period. At the end of the 10-week period, we took a field trip to the Pembroke Pines Community Theater, and I saw my first production ever of Romeo and Juliet. So this is my first experience with live theater, and I fell in love. I mean, I fell in love with Romeo. I fell in love with the idea of telling a story, and I'll never forget. There was a pivotal moment. There's a pivotal moment where, it's the beginning of Act 2. They're looking for Romeo, and Mercutio and Tybalt. Everyone's looking for Romeo, and they can't find him. And I'm sitting at the very, very last row with my dad, but I'm sitting in the aisle seat. So it's I'm sitting on the aisle seat. There's the stairs, and then there's other rows of seating. And in between the rows, there's a cabinet, against the wall, against the back wall. And watching Act 2 transpire after the intermission, sitting with my dad, and all of a sudden the cabinet opens up, and Romeo pops out, and he looks at me, he goes, and that was the moment that changed my life forever. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. That changed my life. It was an extremely transformative moment, and I was like, that's what I want to do. Because it was just the impact that he had on me. I was so enveloped in the story, and I didn't even understand the technicalities of it. I didn't understand what it was doing to me emotionally. I was just enthralled in the story. And my dad was a great storyteller. He used to tell stories to me and my brother all the time of his youth, his childhood. And my dad was a DJ in the 70s and 80s in New York and Brooklyn during the birth of disco, hip hop. So he had plenty of stories. He worked with Run DMC. He was in the music industry for a little bit before starting a family. And so storytelling was always a pivotal form of communication, right?
I love that.
And to go back to your question, I don't feel like I need to go to school, but there's certain aspects of the business, right? And my financial acumen. My brother was the first person in our family to graduate with his bachelor's, my younger brother. He's in grad school now. He's getting his master's in theater.
That's awesome.
So he's 3 years younger than me. And yeah, he's an amazing actor. He's amazing. He's he was reading books on Stella Adler and Stanislavski at 13, 14, just a different breed.
That's amazing.
It's a huge form, and people think, theater and acting is playing pretend, but I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's telling the truth. I think it's telling the truth in a way where it allows you to take off the mask and tell you the truth using whatever, the character as a vehicle, or the script, that the playwright's words that they wrote as a vehicle to tell the truth, right? And I think, that's what makes theater so special and transformative. It's the oldest art form on earth. You know, I always joke too, like Shakespeare was the first rapper. Like I always say that joke. Like I think he is, man, because like he was writing in iambic pentameter verses,
right?
You know,
right?
Couplets. I mean, using literary devices that we use. You know, alliteration, metaphors. You know, I mean, complex literary devices that rappers use, and they probably don't. They're not even aware of it. You know, but it's mastery of the English language.
Right.
It's literally playing with the art form, playing with words. Shakespeare was a wordsmith. You know, as a rapper, you're telling stories. You're a storyteller, and you're a wordsmith. That's your living. That's your profession. You study words and you manipulate them. So, I think that's the through line for me.
So let me ask you this. I don't know if we're able to talk about it yet, but you just showed me a music video.
Yeah.
When I watch that music video, I can really see this side of your theater background, your interest in theater, your storytelling.
Right.
How do you think that correlates into your work? Like this music video you just showed me, that your music, your album storytelling. How do you tell your own story in these albums that you're putting out, or these music videos, or you know, any other form of media?
Right. For me, the foundation is always going to be like, how can I tell this story? What am I trying to convey? And whatever the medium, you know, the medium may change, the format may change, but the essence is still the same. So it's like, if I'm choosing to tell a story through song or through visuals, you know, the methodology and the foundation of it'll remain the same. The format and the medium may change. So to me, I don't see a difference. People ask me that all the time. They're like, you know, I know my dad, he'll tell me, you got to pick one. You got to pick one. You got to narrow it down. That's the only way you can become a master at something. And I agree with him. And, you know, there are people who spend 10,000 hours just as an actor studying the technique and the craft of acting and all the components that go into that. And same thing, like for you, for instance, like filmmaking. You spent hundreds of thousands of hours. You told me, right? When did you start?
13.
13.
12, 13.
And how old are you now?
24.
So
24.
11 years, a decade, right?
Yeah.
Think about how many thousands of hours you put in your 10,000 hours already. It's just people haven't seen it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like people don't see, they only see the results. They don't see the process that goes behind it and the time spent and the experience. So I feel like, to me, it's all the same. I don't differentiate it.
Right. So yeah, you're saying, like, I've heard that before of, you got to pick one. You got to do this one thing. You have to have it all planned out and ready to go. But as artists, we don't really have a lot of things. We're lovers of art. That's what we want to do, is we want to explore different mediums. We want to try out different things because that's who we kind of are. Yeah, if you're a scientist, you got to pick one way because it's science. There's mathematical equations that you have to follow and stuff like that. But if you're putting out your art, it doesn't matter what medium it's in or anything like that. At least that's kind of what I think. Right. And I think you kind of feel that way.
Absolutely.
A little bit as well.
I think that's where the education like comes in. It's like there's a constant process of like discovery. Like you're always trying new things, and with each medium comes a different education, and it brings out a different aspect of you. You know, certain set of challenges and limitations with each medium, right? And then that brings out something in you, in your character, in the way that you have to communicate, the way you have to edit, the way you have to crystallize the idea. And I think, to me, I like playing with those challenges and those limitations, and hopping from one medium to the next. You know, there's the through line, and like you said, you know, how does theater inform the music videos and live performances, like, and the video will be out by the time this comes out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
They'll see it.
So we can see it.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, it's just an education. Like
Right.
for me, live performance, right? When I am on stage performing my music, I have to convey the story and the emotion of what I'm, of whatever, whatever the expression was that led me to create the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a theater director, a mentor. He really trusted me, and he trusted us to explore. He wasn't so much micromanaging and overseeing everything where some people could do that. He kind of let you play in the sandbox and like color outside the lines, and he would let students direct their own one acts.
Nice.
And he did not oversee that process at all. So there were 2 times that I directed a one act in high school, and that process, I mean, is extremely informative, and you have to like design the set with the set designer and get with the lighting technician and like really like create this vision for whatever you're trying to convey. And I think about that when I'm performing, like how can I bring something different, like, and also keep it hip hop. Like my dad's from Brooklyn, like I'm from Miami, I'm from Carroll City. This stuff runs through my blood, and I feel like I gotta keep it hip hop always.
Right.
So it's like,
with also staying true to
the
you.
artistry and me and whatever I'm trying to express in that moment. But always gotta keep it rap. Always gotta keep it rap.
Yeah.
And I think, rap and punk are cousins, so I like to keep it punk too.
I love that.
Yeah.
Those two mix very well
Yeah.
together.
I think they're cousins. for
Yeah.
sure.
Oh yeah, of course.
I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican, so I'm Afro-Latino. So
Okay.
I'm mixed race, black, white. I'm, on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a disconnect from my culture in a sense because I don't speak the language. I don't speak Spanish. And that was my maternal grandmother. That's my maternal grandmother's first language.
Okay.
So there's like a language barrier at play. And with theater, right, it wasn't always like a welcoming space. Like it wasn't until like 2016 Hamilton, right? Like that's the I guess the nexus point.
That's when it became cool for a lot of these.
saying?
Yeah.
Like, so I remember my freshman year, we had show and tell, whatever, like the first 3 days of school when you're like, introduce yourself and tell 3 things about you. And I like shared this rap that I wrote because I was in Broward County. So I lived in Dade.
Okay.
And my mom, that's where she grew up. She was, I was raised in the same house that she was raised in.
Okay.
So I lived in a house with 10 people in Carroll City, in Dade, which is not the best area. In 2004.
How old are you, by the way?
I'm 27.
27. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in 2004, when I moved to Carroll City, in that same house with my, grandmother and my grandfather. There was 10 of us in one house. It was a lot in a 3-bedroom house. So, just the environment. Like, my mom didn't want my brother and I to. She knew what Carroll City taught her. She knew what it exposed to her, and she didn't want us to go through the same things. So, I don't know if she can get in trouble for this now. I don't know. Like,
We'll cut it out if.
Yeah, we lied about our address so we could go to like an A school, like a better school in Broward.
I did that too.
I feel like a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
Kids were, doing drugs and all that. And, Opelika, Carroll City, where I was from, where my mom's from, it was the most violent city per capita in 2004.
Wow.
In America.
Wow.
Like, higher than, some of the like, most consistent names, Baltimore, St. Louis, you know what I'm saying? And that's when we moved there. So it was like, I remember, hearing gunshots at night, knowing what it was, and my parents like having to pacify me and be like, there's just fireworks, So it's like growing up in that environment. Broward was also not the best area. It was better as far as like the education there, but the culture is very much the same. It's Miami-Dade, so it's like it's only a district over. It's like equivalent, like we're in Pinellas now. It's Pinellas and Hillsborough right next to each other.
Right.
So going to school in Broward, you know, hip hop was always a part of me, and I would always write poetry. So I was writing poetry from very young, and quickly turned into rap. And then, you know, this is like the dawn of the birth of SoundCloud. And my cousin, he was a producer. He was 8 years older than me.
Okay.
He was a producer, and he was an intern at a studio down in Miami called Circle House.
Okay.
So he was interning there while like Neo was recording an album called Libra Scale, which I love that album as the song One in a Million. Neo's the GOAT, bro.
It's a great album.
It's a good
album.
Neo slept on.
Nowadays, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he kind of sold out. You know, he did the Pitbull EDM thing, but make your money, man. Like, make your money. All right.
But that's going back to kind of staying true to yourself, especially if that's what, not to get off topic, but if that's what he was feeling in the moment, that's kind of what you have to do with that, you know, medium. Like, he's trying out different mediums, but in the same type of music. But yeah, go ahead. I don't want to talk about Neo. I want to talk about you. So
yeah. No, but my cousin was a big influence. So he had a studio. I mean, he dropped out of high school, and his mother was very supportive of him. You know, got the best equipment. He was recording in Pro Tools at 16. He was interning at Circle House at 17. So watching him like go through it, you know, I was in middle school at the time, and I would write these raps. Going to high school here in Pinellas, you know, doing theater, going back to like Hamilton was the nexus point, right? Like, rap wasn't cool. So when I moved here at the beginning of 9th grade, you know, these kids didn't know me. These kids have, you know, established relationships since kindergarten or whatever. I remember sharing, like, for show and tell or something, like a rap that I had written, and the response that I got was like not an enthusiastic one. You know, it was like,
what are you doing?
That's weird. Yeah, it was like 2012, you know?
Right.
So I kind of just always kept it close, and I didn't really share too much after that, and I really like involved myself in theater. Like, I really involved myself in theater and in film, and that was my education. So like, I always wrote, but I didn't necessarily like share it. So it wasn't until I graduated high school, and I was like, yo, it was cool. It was cool again, but theater is like majority white space. It can be a pretentious space. It wasn't until like Hamilton where inclusivity and diversity and all these things, like we had to meet these quotas now. Like, now it feels that way, and like there's blowback from people like you know, on the right, like conservatives, like, oh, these diversity quotas and stuff. But it's like, yo, y'all had 100 years of cinema. Y'all had 100 years. Like 2016. You know what I'm saying? A post Michael Brown era, post Ferguson era. Like, you know, I remember being, you know, writing a song like inspired by that, because you remember you were on Tumblr? Yeah,
a little bit, yeah.
So like, I was big on Tumblr. I had a whole, you know, film blog, art blog that I would, you know, write on. And I remember like the news wasn't covering what was happening in Ferguson, like the Ferguson protests and the uprisings. And they actually framed it as riots, right? Like rioting or looting, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, and even as earlier as like 2012, like Trayvon Martin, right? That's right here in Florida.
30 minutes away from where I grew up.
Really?
Yeah.
It's crazy. I remember that being an extremely formative, you know, my dad is very much like, he always spoke about these things, right? Like, I remember him showing me, you know, the like documentaries on Emmett Till at like 7, 8, you know, because he wanted to give me this education. Like, this is how the world has operated, does operate. And, you know, I have privilege as like a light-skinned, like Afro-Latino. Like, I'm privileged in that regard. Like, I acknowledge that privilege, but doesn't erase the history and the things that like my grandmother had to go through, and the things that my grandfather had to go through, and the sacrifices that they made in order for me to obtain the privilege that I have. So I've always been cognizant of that, and I try to incorporate that in my art. But it was difficult going to a 91% Caucasian school.
Right.
It was extremely difficult.
Right.
It was like...
So one thing I'm interested in now, how did you, going to this school, when you were making art and making music, was that frustrating to you to have to go to that school Monday through Friday every day, but also still want to put out these raps, this poetry, writing, films. Was that how did you deal with that, like, frustration of having to deal with that every day?
I just like worked harder. I just worked as hard as possible. I worked harder every single day, and I felt like I had something to prove in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was in Miami, I didn't feel that way because I was around people who looked like me.
Right.
We all shared a cultural background. Like, it was a bunch of Caribbean folk. It's a bunch of, you know, Black and Hispanic folk. Like, so I didn't feel alienated or isolated in that way. You know, there's a certain level of like that period of time where it's like, okay, do I conform or do I stay true to like my background and who I am, at like my essence? And I just like, for a while, I felt like I had to hide. And then at a certain point, I was like, man, I'm not here for that. Like, I'm here on this earth because I have a purpose and I feel like I have something to express. And at a certain point, I just had to be like, fuck it. I didn't feel respected by my peers. I didn't feel like people viewed me as equal. And even my director, I'll never forget something that he told me one time. He told me that he wouldn't consider me for the lead role, even though he felt I was the best, because I looked too ethnic. So I'm like, and this is, you know, 38-year-old white man from Louisiana, you know what I'm saying, born in the 70s, 60s, late 60s, early 70s. So it's like, hearing that does something to
That's devastating.
a 14, 15-year-old boy.
It's devastating.
Yeah, it was absolutely devastating.
Especially at an age where it's so developed, like you're developing every single day of your life.
Yeah.
Like that now is ingrained into it.
Mm-hmm.
So having to hear that, I mean, is one of the worst things possible. But it seems like you flipped it.
I did, I had to. And then I worked so hard where he like couldn't deny me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he couldn't deny me opportunities because I was like, I was better than most of my peers. Not because I feel like I'm better or I have an ego, which I did have an ego. And we'll talk about that later.
We all did.
We'll talk about that because that's what this album is really about. This is what Advanced Decay is about. It's the battle with the ego and the higher self.
Yeah.
And taking off the mask and being who you really are.
Right.
You know?
I don't want this to be an interview where I'm like, so tell me about this album that you're working on. But I do definitely want to get into that because I am interested. But I want to hear this first. So,
I mean, hearing that, being who I am, where I came from, and at a certain point, like, I stopped living with my dad. So, like, his influence wasn't as prevalent in high school. So I really looked to my director almost like as a surrogate father figure. And I even told him that. So, like, to hear that is like, I mean, I remember, you know, even my mom has a journey with this, and I don't, you know, I'll share this with her. We might have to cut this out because she's very private. Mm-hmm. I just noticed that tattoo.
Oh, yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah. That's the frame rate we always shoot in, yep.
That's dope.
Yep.
That's it's closest to what the human eye perceives.
Yes. So, like, when you're shooting in 24 frames, you're really shooting at 23.976.
Wow.
So, and that's also the first camera that I ever got was a tiny little camera that my mom had. This is all that it shot. And it actually said 23.976 on it.
Really?
And I was like, that's a weird number. So then when I got into, you know, a little bit older and started understanding what a frame rate actually was,
right.
I was like, y'all are lying. This is not actually 24. Like, This is not 24. It's 23.976. So now whenever I get to, like, a new camera or whatever, I always will try and set it to 24. Or if it says 23.976, I'll set it to that. Just a reminder in case I forget, you know.
That's beautiful.
What it is.
I love that. No, that's dope.
Thanks, bro. Thank you.
I had a Nikon on my first camera.
Yeah.
It was a D3300.
Uh-huh.
I was 18. I got on my 18th birthday. And it would just go 23 to 24.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I have one of my best friends. His dad is a photojournalist, and he's been around cameras his whole life. And he told me about that number, and I would always try to get to it, but it only did 23 or 24.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I gotta pick one.
Well, because nobody cares about the decimal.
Right.
If there's a decimal, we automatically shut it out. It's like, okay, I don't. What is this? What do these numbers mean? You know, but yeah, they were always really important to me. So
That's awesome.
That's
Man.
why, yeah.
That's beautiful. I love that tattoo. Man.
Tattoo artist almost put the wrong number on it. So I was like, well, let's make sure that's right before we do that. But yeah, man, I like that. Yeah, I mean, that's detrimental to your mental state.
Yeah, and
at that age.
If I was in Miami, I wouldn't be dealing with these identity issues at all.
No.
Like I wouldn't be dealing with it at all.
No.
So it's like, it was a cognitive dissonance there, and like I spent 4 years, but like 40 minutes north of Atlanta.
Okay.
From 4th grade, well, 3.5 years, fourth grade to 7th grade. And then I moved back to Miami, finished middle school, 7th and 8th grade with the same kids that I started elementary school with. So it's like, to have that 3-year gap in between, people change a lot between 4th grade and middle school. Like, that's when everybody gets cool and you start talking about girls, people smoking weed. I'm like, yo, and I went to school, like this is prior to the 2008 crash. So like we had gotten a house prior to us losing the house. You know, a pretty nice area. Like it was a nice area. It was the suburbs. It was still diverse though, because it's like right outside of Atlanta. So again, even there, I didn't really deal with like cultural issues. I mean, identity issues. It was more of like a culture shock just because of like going from a metropolitan city like Miami to like farmland suburbs, you know, like you seeing cows and horses everywhere. It's like there was a little bit of a culture shock in that regard, but identity issues I didn't deal with in Georgia, which you would think like it's a red state, it's more conservative, but no, I mean there was.
Atlanta's kind of a safe haven in that way.
Yeah, I mean it's like the most populated, you know, black city in America,
right.
So it's like I didn't really deal with those things. So dealing with them here in Tampa. Like,
you'll get that.
Yeah, I mean,
you'll get that. Yeah.
Specifically, you know, I'm saying in Pinellas, like I went to a, you know, like I said, it was at the time, 2012 was, I don't know what it is now, but it was 91% Caucasian. So it's like to deal with that, you know, there was like maybe 3 people of color in theater when the beginning of my freshman year. My senior year, Hamilton's out. We probably had like 25 or 30 people of color. So it was like to watch that growth. And even like my director making that comment about me looking too ethnic for a role, you know, granted, we're doing a show and it was set in 1920s New York. 1920s New York, like the birth of the Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah.
The most culturally significant time probably in our history.
Yep. What show was it?
Thoroughly Modern Millie.
Okay.
So it's like, are you telling me this character can't be a person of color?
Right.
Because the original Broadway cast, he was a white guy?
Yeah.
Like, it was just like things like that.
It's because in theater, it was always a white playing field.
Yeah.
Always. So a lot of these guys, that your teacher probably grew up watching theater, which was all white people.
And it's so frustrating because it's like, right, we really devise our own echo chambers, right? So it's like August Wilson is probably the greatest playwright of all time. And so there's plenty of examples of like groundbreaking black art in theater, black artists, black actors, you know what I'm saying? James Earl Jones, Denzel. So to me, like that's lazy. Like he was just biased and stuck in his own echo chamber. And I challenge that in a positive way, I believe, because, you know, I probably made it easier for my brother to come in after me and like excel in theater. He was the president of the theater program, president of improv troupe, got lead role after lead role after lead role. I had to fight exceptionally hard. It was just a different time, you know? And just, I know it's like only a 3.5 year difference between my brother and I, but
no, you made it easier. It does.
And
you can make a difference in a week.
And Hamilton made it easier. You know what I'm saying? Like that, it was such a cultural behemoth. It was like, you can't ignore it, you know? It made it cool to be, you know, diverse.
Yeah.
It made it cool to have elements of hip hop and all these things. And I remember being laughed at my freshman year. So it was like, it's just interesting to see how time, it'll shape people. And like we're all malleable, right? Like now, like my director doesn't have those views anymore.
Right.
You know? So it's like, but in that moment of time, those ideas were crystallized in his brain so much so where he actually said those words to me. I don't even know if he remembers that, but I do.
Of course you do.
It was extremely formative.
Yeah.
And, you know, now I don't have those problems at all. like now I'm in like an all Black and Latino cast, and you know, I always dreamed of like making art my profession, and it's like I'm getting paid to act, I'm getting paid to rap. You know, at a certain point I was getting paid to direct, and I took a step back from client-based work selfishly to work on my own art.
That's okay though. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, and
as an artist,
it was an education, right?
Yeah,
it was an education. You know, I learned a lot, and like as an artist, and that's why I'm going back to school to circle back to your initial question.
Yeah,
because I got the creative side down, I got the creative aspect down. I have the real world experience. I have, you know, an extensive portfolio and resume. I like to let the work speak for itself. But it all is an education. I feel like, and as an artist, you have to have foundational knowledge in every aspect, right?
Right.
Because if I'm communicating to you, right, I need to be able to communicate certain things to you. I need to have certain vocabulary down, and like, so I'm not like completely in the dark and going in blind. Like I know how to communicate my ideas in an effective way where it's easier to crystallize and execute. And you know, I'm going back to school because my business and financial acumen isn't there. So when I was doing client-based work, it was just bad business. It was bad business. I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
I didn't know what to charge, you know. So I'm quoting people a price, doing this work, right? Undercutting my services. And the service providers of all my peers and competitors, right? Because if I'm undercutting, the market value is going to go down.
Yep.
Because people are going to come to me because that's a great deal.
Yeah.
No one else is charging that. They're charging double, triple that. Well, there's a reason why they're charging double, triple that, because of the time that it takes, the equipment cost, the labor cost.
Yep.
How many hours do you spend in a project? Probably 15 to 20 hours. Editing, the day of shooting, you know?
Yep.
Any revisions that need to be made if there are notes, you know what I'm saying? That all, it compounds. And it's like, when you do the math, it's not what people really think.
No. They just think it's something, okay, you come out, you provide your service, and then that's it. Nah.
The work doesn't end there.
Nope. That's actually half of it. They're just seeing the tip of the iceberg
right.
with that. But,
and yeah. I had to get that education, you know, by undercutting my services and by doing bad business and by ruining my reputation as a service provider and like fucking up really bad a couple times, you know? I did good work still. I'm still proud of the work that I did. I could have done even better work.
Yeah.
But I also don't feel like that wasn't my path. I always made art. I always was making music. And that's where the fatherly advice comes into play, right? Like, pick one. Because the energy that you put into this is taking away from the energy that you could be putting into here. The investments that you're putting in over here are going to take away from the investments that you could be putting in over here. And if you want to get to where you want to get to, then you got to make those sacrifices and you got to be decisive. So at a certain point, after fucking up one too many times, costing people time, money, you know, and like as a service provider, right? Like as a director, like you have someone's ideas in the palm of your hands. You have a lot of power. They're trusting you. Their hard-earned money, their time, you know, their ideas, their imagination, that they're asking you to cultivate and like help them execute a vision. I never took that for granted. But just bad business, no education, you know, not knowing how to write good contracts, you know, thinking that I knew what I was doing. And now it's like, this is 5 years ago, so now we have ChatGPT to help us, right?
Exactly,
like, so,
exactly.
You know, I had to figure it out, like, and now it helps me because it informs what we're doing right now. And like, you know, the work that I hope to do with you in the future, you know? And it's like having that education. You know, some people are like, you quote them a price and they're like, that's too much, I'm not paying that. It's like, no, it's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like having that respect, because I've been on the other side, I have immense respect for what you do. And I think life is all about discovery and trial and error and the education that comes from that. And like, I'm grateful for those experiences. And I'm grateful that people granted me grace and, you know, understanding, and they weren't happy with me probably. They weren't happy with the final product. It could have been better. There's some times where, you know, I had to refund a client because I didn't even make it happen.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It happens though. It happens. I mean, especially like what you were saying, the education is important with stuff like that, but I like what you said, it wasn't your path. You know? It wasn't your path.
It led to this, right? It led to this, right? It was a little detour.
Yep.
And it taught me so much. It allowed me to practice because, you know, eventually I'm going to make feature films one day.
Right.
So it's like having that education was extremely important and foundational, and I'm going to carry it with me for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the rest of my artistry and the rest of my life, being thorough, learning how to communicate better, you know.
I always say failing is the best thing you could do for yourself, because failing at something, you learn so much more than actually being successful at something. Success is, you know, selfishly you kind of want to just bask in your glory at the success that you had. But failing, you're kind of sitting there like wondering why you failed, wondering how you could be better. And I think that's really the only thing that you can do to keep going, keep moving forward with certain things. And with that, what was one of the struggles? Did you have a moment of failure with this new album that you're coming out with, or did you have any moments of success that were, you know, noteworthy to you when you were working on this, or trying to find the footing with the album?
It was written and recorded in 2021, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I had to work with certain limitations in my budget, limitations in equipment, like all these different things, right? And just like learning to let go, and it's a time capsule for that moment, and you learn something new. And obviously there's always going to be stuff that you would like do differently, or like you wish you had this equipment and that, and I'm trying to get out of that headspace where I'm trying to, there's this quote, like, be where your feet are. Like, just be where you are and trust, and getting rid of the doubt. So I would say like the biggest and the only failure for this is the fact that I even doubted myself at all. Like that I took so long of a gestation period, but I also feel like everything has aligned in the way that it was supposed to. So I can't even say that, because life happens and it gets in the way, and learning to be malleable and like adaptable, and not allowing life to get in the way, still showing up for yourself even when things are hard or you're struggling. And you know, I was in survival mode for so long, so I like kind of put a lot of things in the back burner and like just was trying to figure out life. 2022 was an exceptionally hard year. You know, I dealt with a lot of like alcohol and addiction, you know, and that clouded my judgment, that clouded my decision making, you know, and I'm actually 60 days sober today. Yeah.
I love that.
Today's my 60th.
Congratulations.
I appreciate it, man. You know, that's what my grandma will want. And when she passed away, I had just turned 18. And no, I just turned 19. I was 18 turning 19. And she passed away on Thanksgiving morning.
Wow.
The day after her 84th birthday. And they said she wouldn't make it to Sunday. And I said, no, I know my grandmother. She's going to turn 84, and then she's going to go. And that's exactly what she did.
Really?
Yeah, I knew her.
I just got goosebumps.
She knew me
That's
better
awesome.
than anyone on this earth. She's the most influential person in my life, in my past, present, and future. I got this tattoo for her shortly after she passed. She wouldn't like that. She wanted me to not get tattoos, but
Show the camera.
you know. So she used to wear this medallion, and it's the size of a penny.
Okay.
14 karat gold, stained glass. She wore it every day around her neck, even in the pool. She never took it off when she showered. And, you know, one day I'm asking her, we're in the pool, and I'm like, Mama, what is that? What is that? Why do you always wear that? And she's like, my God is always with me, and you'll know that your God is always with you. And I was like 7, 8. I didn't know what she meant, but as time continues to move forward, I feel like that statement like reveals itself to me in different ways, and I still am discovering what that means. And she was an amazing woman. She was a brilliant woman. Empathetic, compassionate, sensitive, temper, hothead. But she was curious, and she always had a different book in her hand. Like my brother and I would go over there every week, and every week she'd have a different book. She was really big into stories. She was in her novellas, in her stories that she'd watch every night. And I was a voracious reader growing up. I mean, in first grade, I was reading at a 12th grade level.
Wow.
Because I always had a book, and I was always advanced, and I was always like, I want more, and like, they would try to give me books that were age appropriate, and I was like, I'm not interested in these. Like, I remember my grandmother, she'd always buy the Magic Treehouse books. Do you remember those books?
Yeah, I do.
Those are cute books. I love them. They always hold a special place in my heart. But there was a whimsy to them. There was a childlike whimsy to them, and you would go through the different periods, right? Different historical events in time with the two central characters, and that was like a formative book series. But I got to a certain point, like in first grade, I'm like, I'm not. And it's like, okay, Harry Potter, like that's fun, like, but
right.
I need more. So
right.
I remember reading like Stephen King novels. They had it in my elementary school library, which they should not have had. There's an orgy scene in that. I was like, Mom, what's an orgy? No.
like what is this?
Yeah, I'm like, but, I wanted to challenge myself. And like, I remember I was in kindergarten and I tested so high in reading and writing that they were like, he's ready to skip a grade. But my child therapist and the school guidance counselor, they felt like my emotional maturity wasn't there. Like I was still on the same level as my peers, right? Like, but for reading and writing, since I tested so high, I would go to the first grade class in kindergarten for those subjects. So I'd be in the class with them for reading and writing, and I would go back to kindergarten for the rest of the class, social studies, science, and math. And I just always loved stories, man. And it's like, once I got past books, it was like film.
Right.
And it was like, then I'm obsessive. My dad's the same way. He processes information like he has an encyclopedic knowledge of music and who played bass on Prince's third album. Like he's just like that, he can tell you these things. And who engineered Thriller, you know what I'm saying? Who's the mixing and mastering engineer? Like, it's like, but he was a DJ in the 70s and 80s, so this is the time of vinyl. He had, 2,000, 3,000 vinyls, and he would crate dig, and he would just read through the liner credits. And that's like something that's like, I feel like a lost
oh yeah, it definitely
art.
is.
And I feel like, artists like Tyler, they're kind of bringing those ideas and those things back into the forefront, which makes me excited because I feel like, right, there's always a pendulum that swings, right? There's the culture, and then there's like the counterculture movement that's born out of the culture,
right?
The cultural movement, right? So it's like we're seeing that now. We're seeing the pendulum swing back. People are tired of the mainstream. They're tired of fast food. They're tired of it. They want substance. They want nutrition. They want something that's going to speak to them on a level where there's some depth of some kind. And I feel like we're seeing that with artists like, with Tyler, and we're seeing, even like artists like Earl Sweatshirt and Mos Def, like Yasin Bey, like they're seeing resurgence, right? Like, so that to me is exciting because it tells me that, there's a place for me.